My beloved brothers and sisters, let me start with a reality check. Even Allah, the creator of the heavens and the earth, is not pleased by everyone. There are people who reject him, deny him, disobey him every single day. So, who are you and I to imagine that somehow we will live in this world and manage to please every single human being around us? It's impossible. The idea that it is impossible to please everyone is something every single one of us has experienced in life, no matter who we are or what we do. From the earliest days of childhood to the final stages of life, people have expectations, opinions, and judgments. Sometimes they praise, sometimes they criticize, and often they contradict one another. One person says you are too strict, another says you are too lenient. One says you are too generous, another says you are wasteful. One says you are religious, another says you are extreme. The truth is that human beings will never all agree on who you are or what you do. That is the nature of this world. If we look at the greatest of all human beings, the Prophet Muhammad (FDFA), we see this reality clearly. He was the most truthful, the most trustworthy, the most kind and merciful of people, yet even he was accused, insulted, and rejected. Some people called him a magician, others called him a poet, and others went so far as to call him a liar, although they knew deep inside that he had never told a lie in his life. If the messenger of Allah (DFA), with his unmatched character and perfection in delivering the message, could not please everyone, how could we ever think that we can? That alone should free us from the unrealistic burden of trying to live for people's approval. When you reflect deeply, you realize that people's hearts and minds are in constant motion. They change based on mood, circumstance, personal interest, and even jealousy. Someone might love you today because you did something that suited them, but tomorrow they may turn against you because you refused to compromise on something important. Sometimes two people you are close to will expect completely opposite things from you, and no matter how hard you try, one of them will feel dissatisfied. In such situations, chasing approval is a losing battle. You might exhaust yourself, yet at the end you are left empty and unhappy, because it is simply not possible to win everyone over. This truth is reflected in the Quran as well. Allah himself is the creator of all people, the provider of all sustenance, the most merciful, yet despite all of his blessings, there are still countless people who deny him, disobey him, or lie in rebellion against him. If the creator of the universe, the one who gives life and breath, is not pleasing to everyone, how can his creation expect to be? The Quran tells us that some will believe and others will disbelieve, some will accept and others will reject. It is part of the divine plan that human beings will not all see the truth in the same way. That teaches us that striving for universal acceptance is not only unrealistic, but contrary to the very nature of how this world is meant to be. In daily life, the burden of trying to please everyone often leads to frustration and even a loss of identity. Imagine a person who constantly changes their words and actions depending on who they are with. In one setting, they speak one way. In another setting, they change completely, simply to avoid criticism or gain approval. Over time, that person loses their own voice, their own principles, and their own sense of self. Instead of living sincerely, they live in performance mode, always worried about how others perceive them. This is a heavy chain around the neck. It prevents peace of mind and steals the sweetness of faith, because the heart is tied to people instead of being tied to Allah. When you accept that it is impossible to please everyone, you free yourself from this burden. You begin to live with clarity and focus. You recognize that while people's opinions matter in certain contexts, such as showing kindness, respecting rights, and fulfilling responsibilities, your ultimate reference point is not human approval, but divine approval. This shift in mindset gives strength and stability. Even when people criticize you unfairly, you remain calm because you know your intention was to please Allah. Even when someone misunderstands you, you don't collapse inside because you are not seeking their applause in the first place. History is full of examples of people who stood firm on truth and principles, even when others disapproved. Prophets were rejected by their nations, righteous leaders were opposed by their communities. Yet they continued their mission because they understood that the goal was not to be liked by everyone, but to remain true to what Allah commanded. On the other hand, those who compromised truth for popularity often gained temporary praise but lost in the long run, because the same people who raised them up quickly brought them down. When you let go of the desire to please everyone, your relationships actually become healthier. Instead of artificial interactions where you are always pretending, you become authentic. People may not always agree with you, but they will respect your consistency and sincerity. They know what you stand for, and even if they disagree, they understand that you are genuine. That kind of authenticity earns lasting respect, far more than the shallow approval that comes from people pleasing. In the end, the pursuit of universal acceptance is not only impossible, but also unnecessary. Life is too short to waste in chasing moving targets. What really matters is whether Allah is pleased with us. If He is, then even if the entire world disapproves, it will not harm us in the least. And if He is displeased, then even if the entire world claps for us, that applause will not benefit us in the grave. Recognizing this truth is liberating. It allows you to walk through life with dignity, with balance, and with peace. So, the reality is simple. You will never please everyone. Accept it, and focus your energy on pleasing the one who truly matters. In that lies freedom, in that lies strength, and in that lies success in this world and the hereafter. Seeking the pleasure of Allah rather than the approval of people is at the very heart of Islam. It is a concept that, once internalized, changes the way a person lives, speaks, and even thinks. Every human being naturally desires to be accepted, appreciated, and loved by others. We want people to acknowledge our efforts, value our character, and speak well of us. This is a part of our human nature, but Islam teaches us to go beyond this natural desire and to reframe our priorities. Instead of chasing people's praise, which is temporary and unstable, we are reminded to focus on Allah's approval, which is everlasting and unchanging. People's approval is fickle. It changes based on trends, moods, and personal interests. What is admired today may be mocked tomorrow. The very same person who praises you in public may criticize you in private. Someone who appears to support you today may turn against you when circumstances shift. If your entire sense of self-worth is tied to these unstable opinions, then you will live a life of constant insecurity, forever adjusting yourself to meet shifting expectations. In contrast, Allah's pleasure is consistent, rooted in His eternal wisdom. What pleases Him today will please Him tomorrow. What He values is not subject to the trends of society, but is grounded in truth, justice, and sincerity. The Quran repeatedly emphasizes that the true believer prioritizes Allah's acceptance above all else. Allah describes those who spend their lives seeking His pleasure as those who are successful, while those who chase after worldly approval are ultimately losers. The Prophet taught us through his words and actions that seeking Allah's pleasure, even at the expense of displeasing people, is the only path to true peace. He said that if a person strives to please Allah, even if it displeases people, Allah will protect them from harm. But if a person strives to please people at the expense of displeasing Allah, then Allah will abandon them to those very people, leaving them vulnerable and unsupported. This is a profound lesson. When you chase people's approval, you are left unsatisfied, but when you chase Allah's approval, you gain not only His support but also the respect and love of the right people. In practical life, we often face choices that test this principle. A student may feel pressure to join certain groups or engage in behaviors that displease Allah simply because it earns acceptance from peers. A professional might be tempted to compromise on honesty, to fit in with colleagues or climb the career ladder. A person might fear practicing their faith openly because of what society might think. In each of these situations, the battle is between two types of approval, the fleeting approval of people versus the eternal approval of Allah. The believer who understands this key point chooses the latter, even if it means temporary discomfort, because the reward of Allah's pleasure outweighs any worldly praise. One of the greatest dangers of seeking people's approval is that it leads to hypocrisy. When a person does good only because others are watching, or abandons good when others are not, their actions are no longer sincere. The heart becomes attached to image rather than truth, and the worship of Allah is replaced by the worship of people's opinions. In contrast, the believer who seeks Allah's pleasure does good regardless of who is watching. They give charity even if no one notices. They pray sincerely even if no one praises them for being religious. Their actions come from a heart that is connected to Allah, not from a desire to be admired by society. This sincerity, known as Ikhlas, is the foundation of true faith. Another reality is that when you seek Allah's pleasure, Allah Himself places love for you in the hearts of the people who matter. The Prophet if they told us that when Allah loves a servant, He calls out to the angels, declaring His love for that person, and the angels then love him as well. Eventually, acceptance is placed for that person among the people of the earth. This acceptance is not superficial popularity, but genuine respect and admiration. It is different from the shallow approval that comes from pleasing people at the expense of faith. So, paradoxically, by prioritizing Allah's pleasure, you often gain the right kind of approval from people, the kind that is rooted in respect for your sincerity and steadfastness. Seeking Allah's pleasure also gives you inner stability. Life becomes much less stressful when your goal is clear and consistent. When you wake up every day with the intention of pleasing Allah, your decisions become simpler. You measure your actions not against the shifting standards of people, but against the timeless guidance of the Quran and Sunnah. You are not constantly worrying about what others will think, because your heart is anchored in something higher. This stability brings peace of mind and allows you to live authentically. You become someone whose private life and public life are the same, because you are not acting for an audience, but for your Creator. At the same time, seeking Allah's pleasure does not mean neglecting people's rights or ignoring kindness. Islam commands us to fulfill the rights of parents, spouses, children, neighbors, and society. It encourages us to be compassionate, just, and respectful. But even in fulfilling these rights, the ultimate intention must be to please Allah, not simply to gain human praise. A person may serve their parents out of love for Allah, or help their neighbor out of obedience to Allah, and that intention transforms ordinary actions into acts of worship. In this way, seeking Allah's pleasure brings balance. You still care for people, but you do so in a way that never compromises your faith. In the end, the approval of people is temporary, but the approval of Allah is eternal. When you stand before Him on the day of judgment, the applause or criticism of people will not matter. What will matter is whether Allah is pleased with you. This perspective should guide every choice, every word, and every action. The path of pleasing Allah may sometimes mean facing criticism, misunderstanding, or even hostility from people, but it also brings dignity, peace, and the ultimate reward, Allah's mercy and paradise. Once this truth sinks into the heart, it reshapes your life completely. Chasing human approval is like running after a mirage in the desert. From a distance it looks real, it seems refreshing, and it appears to promise relief. But the closer you get, the more you realize that it was never truly there. This is the experience of those who tie their happiness to people's praise or criticism. They spend their lives hoping to be accepted, admired, or validated, yet the satisfaction they seek is always out of reach. Even when they succeed in earning approval, it is temporary, and soon they must run again to maintain it. This endless pursuit leaves a person stressed, restless, and often disappointed, because no matter how much effort they put in, it is never enough. Human approval is fragile because it depends on circumstances outside of your control. Someone may admire you today because you fit their expectations, but tomorrow they may turn away because their standards have changed or because you failed to meet one of their countless demands. A single mistake can undo years of goodwill in people's eyes, even if you tried your best. One harsh word, one moment of weakness, or even one rumor can make people withdraw their approval. Living in such a way is exhausting because you can never relax, never feel secure, and never be at peace. Your worth becomes chained to opinions that are constantly shifting, and in the process you lose yourself. This problem is magnified by the fact that people rarely agree on what they want. One person may expect you to act in a certain way, while another person expects the exact opposite. If you try to please both, you will inevitably fail. For example, one group may praise you for being outspoken, while another criticizes you for not being reserved enough. One person may call you generous, while another calls you wasteful. Someone might think you are too religious, while someone else thinks you are not religious enough. If you try to mold yourself to meet all these conflicting expectations, you will never succeed. You will wear yourself thin, switching roles depending on who you are with, until you no longer know who you truly are. The Prophet Muhammad DFA himself experienced the reality of people's inconsistent approval. He was the most trustworthy, compassionate, and truthful of people, yet his enemies called him a liar. He was a man of wisdom and guidance, yet they accused him of being a magician or a poet. Some praised him when he brought them benefit, but turned against him when he opposed their desires. If the messenger of Allah DFA, with his unmatched character and mission, could not please everyone, then it is foolish to think that any ordinary person could. His example shows us that approval from people is not a measure of success or failure. True success is measured by how well you remain faithful to what Allah expects of you. When people make approval their goal, they often find themselves compromising their values. They may speak or act against their conscience simply to fit in. They may remain silent in the face of wrong out of fear of being criticized. They may exaggerate their goodness to be admired or hide their faith to be accepted. This erosion of integrity brings not only stress but also guilt. The heart knows when it has been untrue, and that knowledge weighs heavily. Chasing approval might earn you temporary smiles from others, but it steals the inner smile of contentment that comes from sincerity. Social media has amplified this struggle. Many people now measure their worth by likes, shares, or comments. They may feel happy when they receive attention, but quickly sink into sadness when the numbers drop or when criticism appears. This constant cycle of highs and lows becomes addictive yet deeply unfulfilling. It is a digital reflection of the same reality. Tying your happiness to human approval means surrendering your peace to forces you cannot control. No matter how hard you try, there will always be someone who disapproves. someone who criticizes, and someone who dismisses your efforts. The Quran and Sunnah teach us to step away from this exhausting cycle by shifting our focus to Allah. When you act with the intention of pleasing Him, the anxiety of people's opinions fades. You still treat people kindly, fulfill their rights, and care for their needs, but you do so because Allah commanded it, not because you crave their validation. This makes your kindness consistent and your character stable. You are no longer shaken by criticism nor inflated by praise. You begin to realize that both can be tests. Praise can test your sincerity, and criticism can test your patience. Either way, your goal remains the same, seeking Allah's approval. One of the most beautiful outcomes of detaching from human approval is the peace it brings. Instead of constantly wondering what people are saying about you, you find comfort in knowing that Allah sees your efforts, even when no one else does. You may sacrifice for your family and receive no thanks, but Allah knows. You may stand in prayer at night when the world sleeps and no one notices, but Allah knows. You may choose honesty over dishonesty and lose worldly opportunities, but Allah knows. His knowledge is enough, and His approval is worth more than the entire world's applause. This does not mean that you will never feel hurt by criticism or rejection. Being human, it is natural to feel pain when people misunderstand or unfairly judge you. But the difference lies in how you respond. If your happiness was built on people's approval, their rejection will crush you. If your happiness was built on Allah's approval, their rejection may sting, but it will not destroy you. You will be able to continue with dignity, knowing that your value is not tied to their opinions but to your Creator's judgment. Chasing human approval is a race without a finish line, but seeking Allah's pleasure is a journey that leads to peace in this life and eternal reward in the next. When you tie your heart to people, you live in constant disappointment. When you tie your heart to Allah, you live with clarity, strength, and hope. At the end of the day, people's words will fade, but Allah's acceptance will remain. The wise choice is to stop running after the mirage, and instead walk steadily on the path that leads to the pleasure of Allah. My beloved brothers and sisters, at the end of the day, life is far too short to be wasted in chasing the shifting shadows of people's approval. No matter what you do, some will praise you, others will blame you. Some will love you, others will criticize you. Even the greatest of creation, Muhammad F. DFA, could not please everyone, so what about you and me? Islam never asked us to exhaust ourselves in this impossible task. Instead, Islam gave us a clear, simple, and powerful mission: seek the pleasure of Allah. When you make Allah your priority, your heart finds peace. You no longer live like a puppet on the strings of people's opinions. You live with dignity, with sincerity, and with focus. You still treat people with kindness and justice. You still fulfill their rights, but you do it for Allah, not for applause. And the beauty is this: when Allah is pleased with you, He places love for you in the hearts of those who matter. And even if some never approve, their disapproval cannot harm you, because your worth is with the One who created you. So walk away today with this conviction. You were not sent into this world to please everyone. You were sent into this world to worship Allah, to obey Him, and to strive for His pleasure. Please Allah, and you will never be disappointed. Please Allah, and you will find peace in your heart. Please Allah, and you will find your path to Jannah.